Hello and welcome to Lightning Talks. We are coming to you live from the Seattle Aquarium on the shores of Puget Sound in the traditional and contemporary territories of the Coast Salish people. And we have speakers joining us tonight from around the country and around the world, from Illinois, California, Australia, the UK, and the Philippines. And wherever you may be joining us from tonight, thank you for being here. My name is Nora Nickum. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the VP of Conservation Programs and Partnerships here at the Seattle Aquarium. And I'm delighted to be your guide this evening as we explore the world of seahorses and sea dragons. Now, these are fascinating, not to mention adorable creatures with so much to learn and new things and even some new species being discovered all the time. Here at the Seattle Aquarium in our new Ocean Pavilion building, we have some seahorses you can come meet. And if you haven't already, I hope the next time you're in Seattle, you will come by. And I think they'll be even more fun to meet once you learn all the fascinating facts and hear the great stories we're going to hear tonight. You will also be hearing from people at 2 other aquariums you can visit to meet some of these amazing creatures. So let's talk about how Lightning Talks works. We have 5 speakers and they each have 5 minutes, not 1 minute more, to share one big idea. And they're going to get warning lights when they have 1 minute left, and when they have 30 seconds left, and when they have hit time. And if they keep going, this is what's going to happen. And that, of course, is why it is called Lightning Talks. And we cross our fingers that happens at least once. Now, during the show and during the presentations, if you have any questions, there are several ways you can submit those. So you can put them in the chat, you can use the QR code, or you can use the link. And we look forward to your questions because at the end of all the presentations, we bring all of our speakers back together for a great conversation, and we draw on the questions you submit to get our speakers talking and share more about what you want to learn. If you would like to support the Seattle Aquarium in helping us advance our mission of inspiring conservation of our marine environment through events like Lightning Talks, we hope you will consider a donation and join us in this important work. Now, without further ado, I would love to welcome our very first speaker to the Lightning Talks stage, Mark Yoon. Mark is an aquarist at the Birch Aquarium at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, UC San Diego. He manages the care of the aquarium's seahorse collection, leads the seahorse breeding program there, and rears newborn fry to adulthood. Mark, are you ready to kick us off?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, your slides look great.
Great. So, hi everyone. My name is Mark Yoon. I am the Seahorse Care and Conservation Aquarist at the Birch Aquarium, and I'm here to talk to you about seahorses and sea dragons, a bit about how they reproduce, and also how we take care of them in aquariums. So, Birch Aquarium is part of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, and it acts as a kind of gateway for the public to learn about the research being done at Scripps. And on top of being a proper aquarium with animals and everything. So we have a newly renovated exhibit that we finished just a few months ago called Living Seas, and included in our collection is a variety of cygnathids, including seahorses, sea dragons, pipefish, and some more distant relatives, but we're focusing more on the seahorses and dragons today. So in case some people weren't aware, just because they look so weird, seahorses are a type of fish. They're just shaped like that because they're highly specialized for their little adaptations. So they have snouts and prehensile tails, and they're actually one of the top hunters in the animal kingdom. So they're actually very sensitive animals, and a lot of our job as aquarists is to work to make sure that conditions are right for them, not just to stay alive, but also so that they're happy enough to reproduce. And one thing that you might have heard about them already is that the males get pregnant and they give birth. And how that happens is that they engage in a little dance together, so they'll sort of pair up and swim together, and then the female transfers the eggs to the male's pouch, and then the male fertilizes them as they go inside, and then they'll develop inside the pouch, sort of how like a little kangaroo baby grows inside of the kangaroo's pouch. And once they're born, they're pretty much on their own. There's not a lot of parental care, and the babies are essentially miniature adults where they're capable of hunting food pretty soon after they leave the pouch. So sea dragons are a bit different from seahorses. So one thing off the top, they're generally larger than seahorses when they're fully sized. Another thing is that seahorses, they have little pouch birth. So Seadragons, they'll actually have the babies grow up on the tail and then they'll hatch just from the outside. They also have the courtship dance, but then when they do that, instead of having like the eggs go inside of a pouch, the female actually sticks a whole bundle of eggs to the tail, and then they'll grow out there. So you might be able to see, I kind of, crowded it with pictures, but that picture in the background is our Seadragon exhibit at the Birch Aquarium, and it's one of the largest Seadragon habitats in the world. And we specifically designed it to be the ideal environment for Seadragons to live and to breed and just, exist. So it's 18 feet wide, 9 foot tall, and holds 5,375 gallons of water, if that means anything to anybody here. And the thing about it is that the tank needs to be tall enough for their courtship dance to be successful, or else chances are what's going to happen is they're going to drop the eggs and it's just going to fall on the ground, even if they have enough space to think that they want to do the dance. And actually at our aquarium, we've had successful hatchings in 2013 and 2023 and 2024, with over 100 grown out to adulthood and shipped to several facilities. And we actually had another transfer of eggs earlier this month. So we're pretty happy about that, and we're watching out for that. So I also wanted to talk a bit about the conservation work that we do. So Birch Aquarium is involved with a number of conservation projects and efforts. So first off, we are an AZA accredited facility. And in case you weren't sure of what that means, so AZA is, you can kind of see it up at the top, it's the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And it's a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of zoos and aquariums to make sure they're operating at the highest standards, not just for the sake of the animals, but also for the sake of the people working there. So we're also involved with SSPs, or the species survival plans. So that's a program run by AZA to manage populations of some certain species in aquariums with sustainability in mind. There's 2 species that we wrote up there, 2 seahorse species in the program, and Birch is involved with both of them. So we are growing those out according to the AZA standards. And we're not directly involved with this, but I just wanted to highlight. So you see that little house in the background, and also sort of like that kind of cage thing with the seahorse on the outside. So that's actually a seahorse hotel. It's a program happening in Australia where they create an artificial reef to have the seahorses kind of grow out there and help their populations recover, because they are an endangered species. And we're also involved with a number of other programs at the aquarium, like the mountain yellow-legged frog, which is our local endangered frog species, and also the sunflower sea star, which is all along the western coast of America. So a number of aquariums are actually involved with that as well, including Friday Harbor Labs just outside of Seattle. So it's a big collaborative effort with a lot of aquariums. So I just wanted to thank Birch Aquarium for providing all of these great photos.
Thank you, Mark, for making sure we got the lightning bolt. And I think you were on your, thank you for the photos.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for the photos, and just thank you for listening.
So my curiosity was piqued by the idea of them needing a lot of height, the Seadragons, a lot of height to do their courtship dance. And I'm wondering if you can describe that dance a little bit and how long they dance for.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of hard without the photos, but we do have like a little graphic at our aquarium where we'll kind of show, like, it's almost like a typical, like a human courtship, like a human pair dance, where they'll sort of like swim up together. And then with the Seadragon specifically, they do something called, like, there's a number of steps in between. They'll do like tail curling, where like they'll sort of like go like this, and then like the other one will mirror it, and like that's sort of like the sign of like, okay, yeah, I'm into you, so I'll kind of get into that. And then they'll start to swim up together. And then like they'll sort of like, do that kind of thing. And then if everything goes well and they're like fine, like, and also like the female has eggs, she'll kind of lay those eggs, but they'll kind of be attached to her, and they'll like swim in a way that the eggs kind of like go onto the tail, and then the male takes it, and then somewhere along that line it'll kind of fertilize it as it like kind of sticks on. So then there's actual babies that grow on there.
Amazing. I would love to see that sometime. Well, if anyone else has questions for Mark, which I'm sure you do, please put them in the chat or use that QR code so we can make sure to pose some of those questions to Mark when he comes back at the end for the conversation. And thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
So our next speaker on the Lightning Talk stage is Richard Smith. Richard could not join us live because he's in the UK and it's past 2 in the morning, but we were able to catch up with him in advance. So we have his talk to share with you tonight. Richard is a British marine biologist who completed the world's first PhD dedicated entirely to pygmy seahorses. And as the leading global expert on these miniature marvels, he has discovered and named the 2 most recent species from Japan and South Africa. He is also the author of a wonderful and best-selling book called The World Beneath: The Life and Times of Unknown Sea Creatures and Coral Reefs. Let's hear from Richard now.
So I thank you very much for having me. I'm going to introduce you today to some creatures that are smaller than your fingernail. They're perfectly camouflaged. They have fascinating biology, but of course, like many marine creatures, they are facing extinction. Most people have never heard of a pygmy seahorse, but I'm sure you're going to agree that they're a fascinating bunch. So, why pygmy seahorses? I did my PhD work on pygmy seahorses, and no one had studied them before. So, that was really important to learn more about their biology and conservation. And they're newly discovered. So, 7 of the 8 species were described since the turn of the millennium. So, it's a very little known group. They're morphologically unique, so they differ than the bigger seahorses in that they have a single gill opening at the back of the head, and the males brood the offspring in a pouch inside their trunk rather than on the tail like the larger seahorses do. And of course, they're teeny tiny, so they range in size from 1.4 to 2.7 centimeters in length, so about half an inch to an inch long. This is the world's smallest seahorse, in fact. It's Satomi's pygmy seahorse. It was described in 2009, and this is in comparison to a dime. So you can see how the difference between a dime coin and the Satomi's pygmy seahorse is quite dramatic. The Japanese pygmy seahorse was the first pygmy that I described as a new species. I'd been seeing it in Japan. I'd seen a couple of pictures, but it hadn't been clocked as being a different species. So in 2018, colleagues and I named that as a new species. And then, quite to our surprise, there was a new species also in South Africa, which was like finding a kangaroo in Norway because there hadn't ever been a pygmy seahorse anywhere in the Indian Ocean before. All the other species are in the Coral Triangle, sort of Indonesia, Philippines, and into the Pacific. So this really was quite the coup to discover and describe this in 2020. My PhD work, although was slightly different, it was on the Gorgonian-associated pygmy seahorses, of which there are 2 species. So the Bargibants and Denise's pygmies, both of which spend their whole adult life on a single Gorgonian coral. Those Gorgonians can be up to 100 years old, so they're very long-lived invertebrates, and these pygmies live on the surface, and their camouflage is incredible on the surface of those. During my research, I was looking at their social and reproductive behaviors, and whether they were male or female was quite important to identify. So you can see here some shots I took, like a bit of a peeping Tom on the underside of the trunk of the pygmies, and the female has a raised circular paw, and the male has a little slit-like opening where the babies will pop from. And I needed to be able to identify when the pygmies were pregnant. So this is a male, and it's quite easy. He was like a balloon. You could really tell when he was pregnant. But maybe the first male in the natural world to get stretch marks, actually. You could tell that soon after he gave birth that he really had given birth. And I was lucky enough to see them giving birth on a number of occasions. So you can see here the little babies popping out and their little shiny silvery eye. These babies just probably about half a centimeter long, and they'll float off in the ocean into the plankton for a couple of weeks before settling onto a new Gorgonian of their own. I also was lucky enough to see them mating. In these shots, you can see on the very left a female full of eggs, and then the male with his stretch marks, and those eggs went across and fertilized over about 30 seconds. But the Walea soft coral pygmy is the first critically endangered pygmy seahorse. I recently co-authored this for the Red List, and it lives in a tiny area of Indonesia. It lives on these soft corals that can bleach much like other corals can. So it's in a really precarious position. And my next project is working with Indonesian folk where they're found to figure out some more about the conservation of these guys. So yeah, that's all. Hopefully you enjoyed learning a little bit about pygmy seahorses.
Well, aren't Richard's photos amazing? Check out his book because there are many more in there of seahorses and lots of other underwater creatures. Like I mentioned, it's the middle of the night for Richard, so he's not here for the Q&A that we'll have later. But if you have questions for Richard after hearing that talk, we are putting a link in the chat to his website where he has a contact form, so you can feel free to reach out to him. When I chatted with him, one of my questions was, how many hours did he have to spend underwater to catch all those critical life moments for a seahorse that happen in a matter of seconds out in the wild? He said hundreds of hours and so much time that he was able to follow the whole life cycles of individual seahorses and be able to anticipate when some of those exciting things might happen. The other thing I asked was where he's going to look for the next pygmy seahorse species. And he said he has a trip planned to the Maldives. So hopefully he will find something exciting there and we will hear about it later. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Shai Apale. Shai is joining us from the Philippines. She's a lead for a project called Saving Mr. Mom and supports the Philippine government in implementing the 2016 National Plan of Action for Seahorses. So take it away, Shai.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Shai Apale, the program leader of the Philippine Seahorse Program, or simply known as Saving Mr. Mom. As we all know, that male seahorses are the ones getting pregnant and giving birth, hence Mr. Mom. So for today, I'm going to present to you about iSeahorse, which is an online tool, and how citizen scientists are actually helping us to know more about the seahorses and how we are protecting them in the Philippines. So this is actually a huge challenge for us conservationists because seahorses are difficult to study in the wild for the reasons that they are widespread geographically ranged. So they are known to inhabit the temperate and tropical waters globally. They are masters of camouflage. They really blend in well in their surroundings. So it's hard for us to spot them while diving. And as mentioned earlier, they are quite small, especially the pygmy seahorses. They have the same size as your fingernail. And the fact that there are few experts who are working seahorses globally. Hence, most species are assessed as data deficient on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, meaning we don't know enough to assess them. So for those main reasons, Project Seahorse, which is a marine conservation based at the University of British Columbia in Canada and the Zoological Society of London based in the UK, actually promoted and launched the iSeahorse. iSeahorse is an online platform which harnesses the power of the citizen scientist, meaning if you are a diver and you went on a diving holiday, while diving, you spot a seahorse, you know the location, you took a photo of it, and then you submit that photo to iSeahorse.org, you are already helping us, researchers, scientists, and conservationists, to know more and improve our understanding about seahorses. So we initially launched iSeahorse in the Philippines way back in 2013, and we actively promoted it, partnered with a lot of diving resorts, operators, and even divers. And based on those several years of promoting it, we already identified two major conservation gains. So a rare species of seahorses that had never been seen before in the Philippine waters were captured on cameras by a lot of divers, and they submitted a lot of these photos to iSeahorse app. And this is what we call the Hippocampus pontohi, or one of the pygmy seahorses. So these are actually submitted by a lot of divers, and the fact that before Hippocampus pontohi was originally known to only inhabit the Indonesian waters. That's why it was identified as a rare pygmy seahorses. But because of iSeahorse, we also now know that they're also living in the Philippine waters. So because of that findings, we are now already have 10 seahorse species that are known to inhabit the Philippine waters. So another major conservation gain out of iSeahorse is citizen scientists were using iSeahorse data to push for another establishment of a seahorse sanctuary. So we received a lot of or several recorded sightings of different species in an island in the Philippines called Bohol. And this prompted us to identify the area as a hotspot of seahorse activity. Eventually, a resort owner invited our team to validate the sightings. So we went there together with our team and some of our volunteers, and we did find 4 different species of seahorses. As compared to the other diving sites in the Philippines, they have a higher number of seahorse diversity. So we have that information, we presented it to the local community and told them, and it created actually a sense of ownership and a sense of pride among them. And eventually the local community embraced the idea of protecting these seahorses because those diving areas are not protected yet. And they actively work towards establishing the sanctuary. So after a series of community consultations, talking to the divers, doing all the monitoring and assessments, eventually the community established what they call now a 70-hectare Anda Marine Park and Seahorse Sanctuary in Bohol. So the success of the Anda Marine Park and Seahorse Sanctuary highlights the effectiveness of iSeahorse in generating community-driven conservation efforts. It also demonstrates how citizen science can contribute to the establishment of protected areas for marine life. So seahorses can serve as a flagship species to promote broader marine conservation efforts. So the community used the data of seahorses in order to protect other marine life as well. So these are all the different project partners and supporters that we have been working with in order for us to gain those conservation highlights that I mentioned earlier. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. Such important work you all are doing in the Philippines. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the threats that seahorses are facing in the wild that conservation approaches like sanctuaries help address.
Okay, great. So actually seahorses in the Philippines are illegally traded. But the fact that there's a huge demand for seahorses around the globe. Aside from that, seahorses habitats are widely damaged right now. And because of establishing marine protected areas, these are no-take zone areas. And that means that seahorses have a sanctuary and area where they're well protected if the MPA or the marine protected area is also well enforced by the community.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I hope others will put questions for you in the chat. I'm sure they will, and we'll look forward to bringing you back soon for the Q&A discussion. Thank you, Shai.
Thank you for listening.
So now we're going to take a deeper dive into sea dragons. And to take us there, our next speaker is Nerida Wilson. Nerida is joining us all the way from Australia. She is the project lead for Seadragon Search, which uses citizen science and AI tools to monitor sea dragons around Australia. And that work has recently led to the weedy sea dragon being listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. You ready, Nerida?
Thank you.
Your slides look great.
Great. So yes, I'm Nerida Wilson. Nora has just explained the project I'm going to talk about, Seadragon Search. And I'll just start by giving you a bit of an introduction into what sea dragon species we have. And so in the first panel, you can see a common or weedy sea dragon. In the middle panel is a leafy sea dragon. And in the third panel is a ruby sea dragon. Now, the ruby sea dragon was only discovered and described fairly recently and occurs in quite deep water compared to where divers normally are. So our project really is focusing on these first two, the weedy sea dragon and the leafy sea dragon. And all 3 species of sea dragon occur around the southern temperate coastline of Australia. I'm coming to you today from Perth in Western Australia. Maybe you can see that in the bottom corner. The only place you'll see where all 3 species are found. So definitely dragon headquarters over here, which is wonderful. And I'm just going to give a little demo about why it's so difficult to understand what's happening with sea dragons in the wild. And I normally like to ask people to spend a bit of time and have a look in these images. The one on the left has a leafy sea dragon in it, and the one on the right has a common or weedy sea dragon. So don't have tons of time today. So hopefully you're swimming along quickly, taking a look, noting what you see. But I'll give you a little tip. This is the back end of a leafy sea dragon disappearing behind some weed because it's seen us coming and doesn't want to be noted. And in the other one, right in the middle of that circle, you might see a little red eye, and that's a common or weedy sea dragon hiding also. So it's not so easy to understand information about their biology that will help us conserve them. Fortunately, there's a few things on our side. And the first is that the spots on the sea dragon's faces and body are pretty stable. And so once the dragon reaches maturity, the spots don't change all that much, and they're unique to each individual. So they're essentially like a fingerprint that we can use to recognize the same dragons again. The second thing in our favor is that people love taking pictures of sea dragons. And there's some very cheap entry-level cameras around these days, as well as some very expensive ones. And so there's lots of imagery that divers have already and are collecting all the time that can be really useful for our work. And then finally, AI tools have been incredibly helpful in making us or allowing us to monitor them across the whole distribution. So if you can imagine, I'm looking at a new photo that's come in and I'm trying to match it to any other photo, any of the other 20,000 photos that we have. It's quite a time-consuming thing. So some of the machine learning tools that we use will give me essentially a short list of images to check and see if it's the same one. So it narrows down the task to being quite manageable. And what we end up with, if we can connect all of these different images of the same dragon on different time points, is a timeline essentially of a dragon's life. And so this is little Jimbo, who we first saw as a very slender-bodied little sub-adult in February 2023. And over the years, we've watched her grow into a beautiful female dragon. And the kinds of things we can learn by collecting this kind of data is things like how long they live for. If they're males, we can count how many reproductive events that they've had because they have those eggs on the tail. It's nice and obvious. And we can also use that unique identifying feature as like in analyses that are like mark recapture, and it's a way that we can estimate how many individuals there are in a population. It's really hard, and we don't know. When we started the project, we didn't know any of these things. So because a lot of the information comes from the diving community, we like to feed back to them as much as possible about what we're finding. So we do annual report cards showing how the project has grown. We do a lot of engagement on Facebook, where we let people know what we've found, and they ask questions and they all ask questions of each other. It's a really fun community to be a part of. And as Nora mentioned, we have been able to use some of this new information to move the weedy sea dragon from least concern on the red list, which estimates extinction risk of species, into the vulnerable category. And not exactly a success story, but it's important that the realistic condition that these animals are in is known, and so that we can get a bit more emphasis around some conservation actions. And I would definitely like to say thank you to our community. It's, huge amounts of time and effort from people. There are many dragon mad people. I found my people. It's been a really, really joyous project to be a part of.
More lightning. Thank you, Nerida, but I think you were pretty much wrapping up.
Yep.
I'm wondering what you have learned about the range of weedy sea dragons. So the one that you showed us several pictures of over the span of more than a year, would a diver be able to go to a specific place and look for that sea dragon? Did they stick around a small home territory?
Yeah, for the most part, they're very site loyal, and typically they would stay in an area for their whole life. But through this project, we've actually identified a few times when an animal has moved. Not really sure why. We have the population that's really close to where I live, actually. There was an animal that just, disappeared one day. It happens. But then 4 months later, she turned up 3 kilometers down the road in another population. So that was really lovely. And and perhaps this kind of behavior is more widespread. We just didn't know before.
Yeah, interesting. Hopefully you'll get even more of a sense of that as you get more of those photos submitted. All right, thank you, Nerida. We are going to bring up our final speaker for the evening, Mark Schick. Mark is a senior director at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago. During his more than 25 years at Shed, he developed Shed's live foods program and was part of the first team to successfully raise sexually spawned elkhorn coral. He also oversaw the development of 6 special exhibits featuring animals that included amphibians, jellies, lizards, and seahorses. So let's hear from you, Mark, about your experience in Chicago. And your slides look great.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's not every day when you walk into work and you get to see this. On April 8th, we got to walk in and see a male dragon carrying eggs on his tail. It was the first time for us to have successfully raised dragons. We've been keeping dragons for over 20 years now, and it was a very exciting moment for us. As has been mentioned, that the eggs. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of it, but what's really beautiful is to see the courting behavior of these animals. You'll see a female and a male. They'll mimic each other in the water column and just kind of float for a while, and eventually the male will push the female up to the up her eggs, and they will attach to his spongy tail, which is very adhesive, and then he will fertilize them. Once that happens, there's about a 45-day window. And talking to our colleagues who've done this before, it's still fairly rare to see dragons reproduced in the aquarium setting. Maybe 10 or 12 aquariums have done it in the last 20 years. And this is our first success. If you see the picture on the left with the white background, that's an early hatchling that was not quite mature yet. You'll see the, for lack of a better word, on the chest, the large round cavity there. That's a yolk sac that was not completely absorbed. You'll also see the snout is not very long, and the appendages, the leafy appendages, are not very filled out yet. On the right, these are animals that were fully mature when they hatched. They're about 1 inch long. You'll see no yolk sac left. The snout is much longer, and the leaves are much more filled out. So they are mature and ready to go. We had 17 animals that were after day 42 that were ready to go, and every one of those is still alive that was fully matured when they hatched, which was pretty awesome. So here you go. Here's the animals with the full snout, fully developed bodies, the appendages, and no yolk sac. Now, next thing I'm going to show you is a little video here, and at about 30 seconds in, there's going to be a little white thing that flits across the screen. That's a mysis shrimp. And I want you to water column with the animals is food. There's a ton of nauplii and different species of copepod, which is a great first food for these animals. We can tailor these foods and nutritionally make them much better than sorry, so it's skipping around here a little bit now. If we enrich these foods with different algae, it's just like feeding yourself a salad. Broccoli's good, carrots are good, but you don't need just carrots, just broccoli. You need all these different nutrient sources. So we can do the same thing with algae for these copepods these animals are eating. And coming in just a second. Oh, I already jumped through. Sorry, I may have missed the shrimp. The shrimp I was talking about was little mysis shrimp, and they're about 1/4 inch long. And if you look in the background of these photos, you see these little white things. Those are mysis shrimp. That's the preferred food of the Seadragons. These are animals that are about a month old, and they went from 1 inch to almost 3 to 4 between 3 to 4 inches long in a month's time. And now they're almost exclusively eating mysis shrimp. And that's what you see in the picture with them right now. What's great with our live foods programs, we can feed them a variety of sizes and species of animals. The mysis shrimp, we can give them day-old animals, 2 days old, 3 days old, 4, 5, 6, 8, and they can vary that food between them. But one of the biggest problems with raising fish is giving them foods that are the right size and the right type. They need to win over between the first foods and second foods. And these mice, it's at different sizes. It makes it very, very easy to do. So I've talked about the young, but one last thing is the dad, he did great. And we gave him about 2 weeks to recover from giving birth and put him back with the adult population. And lo and behold, the day after we put him in, this is what we saw. Apparently he likes being a dad. He is carrying a second set of eggs, and we just moved him off display 2 days ago, and he will be giving birth here in another 4 or 5 days, most likely. Thank you for your time.
That is so exciting, Mark, that happened just a couple months ago and is on track to happen again soon. Thank you for those amazing photos and video. There are a lot of tiny eggs on that dad. Can you tell us more about how many eggs a male carries? Were you able to count those?
Yeah, we have a young male. So this is his first pregnancy, and the first one was about 80 eggs, and the second one is we're not. I haven't got a really good count yet, but it's a little right around 100. So he's doing his job, being a good dad.
That's great. And so were there more from the female, but he didn't catch them all, or do they get better at something as they get older?
I think it's a little of both. We have young females too, so the females are probably not producing as many eggs as they will in the wild. I believe they'll produce around 200 when they're fully mature. And these are very young animals, so we're very happy with what we've gotten so far.
Wonderful. Well, we're hoping for many more successes from the sheds collection. That's wonderful. So stay here, Mark, and we're going to bring all the other speakers back for some great conversation. I've seen so many great questions in the chat and lots of eager, curious audience members ready to hear more. And first, we're going to see if any of you have questions for each other before we dive into some audience questions. No? Okay, I'm going to jump right in. There are a lot of questions about the biology of seahorses and sea dragons and the life histories. So I'll start with a couple of those. Does anyone know something about their eyeballs or eyesight? Can they move their eyes like chameleons independently? Do we know how well they can see or anything else that's special about their eyes?
They can move their eyes independently. They're excellent predators.
Awesome. Okay, what about lifespans? So do we know how old, maybe in human care, the oldest seahorse or sea dragon is? And do the lifespans, are they similar between seahorses and sea dragons, or do we think one of them can live longer?
So generally, sea dragons tend to live longer than seahorses do, but I think like the general range is like 7 to 9 years or so for sea dragons, and then maybe like 2 to 5 years for seahorses, depending on the species, because the seahorses tend to differ a lot more like across species than the sea dragons do. So there's like some really tiny guys which might not live that long, and then some of the larger guys might have like another year or two on the other species.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Nerida.
Let me just add to that. So it seems like across the range of weedy sea dragons in Australia that they might have different lifespans depending on where they live. And so one of the oldest dragons that we've had so far in the coldest waters, which is maybe where you would expect those super long-lived ones, is 16 years. Wow. And that was totally unanticipated. The general estimates had been around 7 to 10 years. But they were estimates, and we have real recordings now of an individual that lived at least 16 years because he wasn't a baby when we first started tracking him.
Amazing.
Nora, I just want to add as well, for pygmy, the smaller seahorses, we have roughly about 1 year of lifespan.
Okay. There are a bunch of questions about what's happening with seahorses and sea dragons in the wild and what is causing them to be endangered or vulnerable. And Shai, you gave us some great reasons from the Philippines. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes. So there's a huge demand for seahorses, dried seahorses, particularly for traditional Chinese medicine. So that's why there are a lot of seahorse trading all over the globe, all over the world. So it's one of the major threats. And like particularly in the Philippines, it's illegal. So it's not the harvesting is unsustainable and regulated. And aside from that as well, the habitats are also being damaged. So using like bottom trawls and those illegal fishing gears that are really damaging the habitats of seahorses. So, yeah.
And Nerida, what are you seeing in Australia in terms of threats to the sea dragons?
Yeah, land use and changes in runoff and pollution, unfortunately from us is definitely one of the biggest issues. But climate change has really had and is having even bigger impacts over time in sort of marine heat waves. And so we have had extensive loss of macroalgae on the west coast from a very big marine heat wave that happened in 2011. And there's many more happening around Tasmania now. So as the ocean kind of moves into a new phase, that's definitely extremely challenging. We're having a lot of emerging diseases and things like that. So yeah, trying to keep a careful eye on what's happening.
Mark and Mark, at your aquariums, I'm wondering what kind of things you tell visitors in terms of how people can take action to help conserve animals like seahorses and sea dragons.
I think with so it's not as easy to sort of say get sustainable seafood because not a lot of people are going to be eating the seahorses, but we just tell people to sort of be aware because like Nerida was saying, like a lot of the threat is from habitat loss and climate change. So like the Seahorse Hotel project I mentioned, a lot of that was started because there were some major storms that happened off Australia, and like a lot of seahorse species are going to be found closer to the coast. So because of the storms, like there was a lot of like runoff from the coast and they lost a lot of their habitat, and that's where the numbers, really, we lost a lot of them after those major storms. And then after the habitat was restored and given some time to recover, like we've seen that the numbers are starting to bounce back.
As far as Chicago goes, I mean, if you think about it, where we live, all our waste products wind up in the Mississippi River, and that flows downstream into the Gulf of Mexico from the entire country. And there's so much excess fertilizer and nutrients put on farm crops, and what winds up happening is you have these massive dead zones where the Mississippi enters the Gulf of Mexico and kills off everything in its path. So there are seahorses arranged that far north, and it's just like any other fish. If they can't have oxygen and it's choked out, that's the biggest thing you can do is stop nutrient input.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a lot of important work is needed, but that there are also a lot of things we know about what we can do to help through different management practices and policy and so on. So thank you for sharing those things. There are a lot of questions coming in about courtship and egg carrying. So Mark, Schick, I'm going to turn it back to you again. There's a question about whether carrying the eggs weighs the males down at all or hinders them in any way, and if there's anything that they do to protect the eggs while they're carrying them.
So it's interesting that you say that, because we do notice that the male swims a little awkwardly after the first couple of days when he's holding eggs. I'm guessing it's because he's carrying an extra load. As far as protecting the eggs, it's interesting that they have this their, for lack of a better word, the belly gets a little spongy and holds the eggs, and actually grows partially around the eggs that are closest to them. So they don't protect them like a pouch does, but does hold them closer to the body. So yeah, there's a little protection, and we definitely do see a little different swimming pattern when they have eggs.
Oh, interesting.
I can just
yeah, go ahead, Nerida.
Yeah, I'll just add that in the wild, many, not many, but like multiple individual males that are brooding will come together and hang out together, and it's sort of been nicknamed Daddy Daycare. We're not really sure exactly why, but it probably is a predator avoidance behavior.
Oh,
Safety in numbers.
Yeah. And Mark Yoon, there was a question about the courtship dance and whether that is correlated with certain times of day or moon cycle or anything that where like times when you pay more attention because it might happen, or if its patterns haven't been noticed yet.
So generally, at least in aquarium, we've noticed that the courtship dance tends to happen sort of like earlier in the day, like right before, like right as the lights come on for us. So we would think that it would happen like around like dawn or dusk or something, where there's like sort of that transitional period. And the thing about the moon cycle is actually something that in aquariums we're actually looking at. So we're part of a Seadragon monitoring program at the Birch Aquarium, where we're kind of like, we sort of observe them for 15 minutes and like keep track of things and sort of look at how we're doing. And we're kind of so for now we're just mostly looking at time and date and all of that, but we're trying to correlate that with the phase of the moon to see if it does affect things, because we have seen in aquariums, like some species, they'll wait until like a big storm or some phase of the moon where there's actually a pressure shift happening in the aquarium tanks that is sort of like a stimulus for them to spawn, even though like they have no access to actual like the light. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what season it is, but it's some physical cue is causing them to reproduce. So we're actually seeing if that affects the Seadragons at all. But for now, it's kind of, we've been having more seasonal spawns. So usually around like late spring or early summer, we'll see that sort of courtship dance and successful attaching of the eggs onto the male.
And Nerida, does that correlate with what you see in the wild?
Yeah, so I've just had a PhD student who's done a chapter or a paper on reproduction and what we've learned, and we did not see any correlation with moon. So we will publish that in the next little bit. Yeah, but it changed a lot in different parts of the range with different water temperatures and things like that. So in some parts it was quite variable. Around Perth, they seem to start within a couple of days every year, no matter what. So yeah, it's really tricky to understand.
Oh, wow. All right, well, I feel like you're all learning really interesting new things all the time, but still hoping to learn more. So I'm hoping we can go around and maybe each of you can tell me a burning question you have about the seahorses or Seadragons that you're hoping to be able to answer sometime soon. Does anyone want to go first?
I'll go. I think, it's amazing. We have been caring for these animals at the aquarium for over 25 years. And this is the first year we've had a successful spawn. We've adjusted temperature and cycle and light cycles to adjust for nature. And we think that has something to do with it. Maybe, maybe not. I would love to know what is the trigger, because they're not related to us, but this year there are 4 aquariums in the US who have had successful egg transfers, and they're all doing the same temperature and light timings. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's not, but we've been doing that for years. I don't know if it's a special year for dragons.
Wow, it's the year of the dragon. That's wonderful. Yeah, hopefully some ability to learn more with more of these successes, more data points. Nerida, do you have a burning question you're hoping to answer?
Well, the research question that I really, really, really want to answer, and it's the reason I do this project all the time, is to figure out how long they live for. That has been an absolute burning curiosity for so long. And so, yeah, it just keeps meaning I have to extend the project, though. We keep learning they live longer and longer, so I have to keep committing more and more time.
Yeah, and what are some of the conservation implications of knowing how long they live?
Yeah, well, you certainly would treat, normally if you might have a conservation action, you build in population models that have a certain, parameter of how long they live for. But we didn't really anticipate that there might be very significant differences in how long they live for across their range. So even if it's one species, we might have to look at more nuanced recommendations for different areas.
Great. Chai, what are you hoping to learn?
So currently with the Philippine Seahorse program, we are seeing how we could address the illegal wildlife trade of seahorses in the country and using seahorses to how to manage fisheries in general and from being illegal to make it sustainable and legalized eventually because there are fishers in my country right now are also dependent on seahorse trade. So we're really working with the government and the stakeholders, the fishers, and how to move towards eventually a sustainable and a legal trade of seahorses. So it's a big activity, but yeah, that's why we are doing the Philippine Seahorse program now.
And Mark?
So I guess my question would be similar to other marks where, so seahorses, they have a sort of reproductive strategy where they'll give birth to maybe like hundreds, maybe thousands of babies at a time, where maybe 1% of those will survive to adulthood. And that's in the wild. And, in aquariums, we're trying to keep them alive as much as possible. So I guess I'm like, a lot of my work is just trying to, see how many babies I can make survive to adulthood. And that's, a bit of like tinkering, a bit of seeing what kind of food they like, when do I have to switch foods to something bigger, like what kind of flow, like all that sort of little things in the aquarium that I'm experimenting around with to see what works for them.
And when you have babies there in the aquarium, do you need to be at work more? Do you need to be keeping a closer eye on them? And what does that look like for your day-to-day?
So it's, we try not to do too much overtime just because, we are aquarists, but we're also human beings. So we try to have our little, our own personal lives outside of it. But it's a lot more of just, taking more care to make sure all of the tanks are clean to like a higher standard, making sure everything's prepped. So like when I'm on my weekend, the people who are going to be taking care of the seahorses when I'm gone, they know exactly what to do and like exactly what I'm doing. And it's a bit hard because like I say, I'm tinkering with things. So like I sometimes, I look a little crazy just being like 1 week, okay, do this and all this. And then the next week I'll be like, actually scratch that. That was a dumb idea. Do this instead. So it's just a bit of, a lot of maintenance, a lot of preparation, and a lot of just communication.
Mm-hmm. Learning and adapting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have time for one more question that I'll pose to all of you. So someone in the audience had a question similar to one I was wanting to ask, which is about what is an important role that these animals play in the ecosystem? What depends on them, or what do they do that's important from what you've seen?
So I would throw this out there. It's a little different. Penicillin came from a fungus growing on an orange, right? Who cared about fungus growing on an orange? We don't know what every animal does in the wild. We don't know their true niche. We don't know what they're truly doing out there. These animals are filling a niche that is open. They're one of the best predators in the world. They are eating small, tiny things. Is that important? I don't know. We don't understand biology that well. None of us do. No one does. So these animals fill a niche that needs to be filled. Exactly why, we don't understand. So there is no animal that is unimportant. There's no species that is unimportant. How we protect that, how we live with that in the future is what we choose to do. So I can't tell you specifically what this animal does. It's very important in the wild, but I can tell you it's a very, very different animal than anything out there.
That is a great answer and a great call to action and to the need to do more research and more citizen science to see what we can learn, but in the meantime to do everything we can to protect and conserve them. Does anyone want to add something?
I guess my answer would be really similar, where it's sort of like they aren't really keystone species the way like, like a sea otter would in the ocean or like a beaver would in like sort of a wetlands area. But it's that kind of thing where a lot of, we're like, you've probably heard that like we're in like the next extinction period where we're losing a lot of animals all the time. And a lot of that is human influence. So I think it's just more we have a responsibility as humans who like cause a lot of this to sort of, instead of being exploiters of nature, just be stewards of like the natural world. And, it's that kind of thing where every animal, everybody has the right to exist. So even if it's just like some weird bug found on like the tip of like some mountain in Peru, like it's our job to kind of, take responsibility and make sure the animals exist for generations.
Thank you, Mark. Shai, you want to give some parting words?
Yeah. So seahorses are not they're not considered as indicator species, but we are really pushing them as a flagship species to create a greater marine conservation. That's why a lot of like marine protected areas in a central part in the Philippines are using seahorse data, and we're able to assist the communities to establish 35 more MPAs protecting seahorses, but not just seahorses, but all other marine organisms that are living in that area are also protected. So I totally agree with the two marks, with the idea that all organisms are really important. We just don't have to really, advertise which one is better or more or something. So yeah, thank you.
All right, Nerida.
Yeah, look, all wonderful answers. Totally agree with all of them. And yeah, I would second that. Sea dragons are wonderful flagship organisms. Their distribution, or the common sea dragon distribution, matches the Great Southern Reef, this beautiful macroalgal temperate reef system in Australia. And so, it's very useful to help. You use them to promote conservation of the whole area. And so even tiny, ugly little funguses, not quite on oranges, get caught up in that conservation effort as well.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing some fascinating facts and some fascinating stories, and really emphasizing the importance of stewardship and conservation of our marine environment, and not just these creatures, but all of those creatures in the water and on land. So I hope there's lots of kudos and applause in the chat, and I thank you all for being here and sharing your wisdom and stories with us. And thank you, audience, for being here this evening. This is our final episode of season 5 of Lightning Talks. This season, we have learned about salmon, we've talked about ocean ancients, and we've delved deep into the world of spineless creatures. If you missed any of those episodes, you can find them all on our website. We are also putting a link in the chat that will take you to a survey if you would like to give us some input for future seasons of Lightning Talks. We would love to hear what you think. And we hope that you will consider a donation to the Seattle Aquarium to help keep these kinds of science events free and accessible for all. We are going to be kicking off season 6 in a few months on December 11th. And the topics are still in the works, but I can give you a sneak peek that we are trying to set up some fun events on topics like bioluminescence, whales, and sea turtles. So we hope that you will visit the Seahorses and Seadragons in the wild, or at Shed Aquarium, or Birch Aquarium, or Seattle Aquarium. And we look forward to seeing you here again in December for season 6. Thank you.